The Era of Good Feelings, 1815 to 1824, Part 2. Yay! So I think we left off with John Quincy Adams and the election of John Quincy Adams, and how he becomes president is a little sketchy, kind of known as the corrupt bargain. And here you can see he was really popular, too, if you read the quote. Of all men whom it was ever my lot to accost and to waste civilities upon, he was the most doggedly and systematically repulsive. With a vinegar aspect, cotton in his leathern ears, and hatred in his heart, he sat like a bulldog among spaniels. Not a real rousing endorsement of John Adams' son. John Quincy Adams. So, how did he become president of the United States? Well, in the election of 1824, he had already run once, right, and lost to Monroe. He runs again, and at this point, there's a complete and utter breakdown of the two-party system. We are down to one party, and really, it's a non-existent party. They're not able to even agree on one or two candidates to run. So you end up having quite a few people run for president, including Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. And you can see how their votes were divided at this point. According to the Constitution, you must have a majority in the Electoral College to win. Otherwise, it gets thrown into the House of Representatives. So this is where the corrupt bargain comes into play. There were no Federalist candidates. It was the end of their era. They are gone. They are done. And now we have just Democratic Republicans, and there are 5 of them. So no party system exists. The election gets tossed into the House. Andrew Jackson actually wins the Electoral College, but he doesn't win it with a majority. He wins it with what we call a plurality, the winner having the most votes. The members of the House, oh no, I'm at risk, dislike Andrew Jackson so much that primarily Henry Clay works to get John Quincy Adams elected in the House. In return for that lobbying effort on behalf of John Quincy Adams, Adams turns around and nominates Clay to Secretary of State. Jackson supporters viewed this as an elite political insider job, and really there's a whole lot of spit and vinegar there, and animosity and division and derisiveness. Oh, it sounds like more recent political campaigns. If progress means to move forward, is Congress the opposite of progress? Deep thoughts. So here you can see Andrew Jackson clearly won the popular vote, but it was not enough because it was not a majority. So you can see the fighting and a foot race to win the White House. So the Federalists are gone. John Quincy Adams wins, and the lone holdout for the Federalists is the Supreme Court, with John Marshall sort of the last of the diehard Federalists in charge. So you have a lot of decisions coming out of that Marshall Court that, as we've talked about, impact and expand the powers of the federal government. The Marshall Court upholds and expands the Constitution's contract clauses. In the case of Fletcher versus Peck and Dartmouth College versus Woodward, they establish Constitution and contracts and also say that states can't impair contracts at that point. You have Cohens versus Virginia, which basically takes the issue of judicial review to state court decisions. So the state courts have to actually fall in line with the U.S. Constitution. The states continually try to ignore the federal government, especially with regards to the issue of slavery and economics. And you had McCulloch versus Maryland, which confirmed the implied powers of Congress, that Congress had the right to uphold the constitutionality of the Bank of the United States, saying that it was necessary and proper to carry out the Congress's power to tax. So again, expanding the powers of the federal government. You have Johnson versus McIntosh and Worcester versus Georgia. These defined the relationship of the United States to Indian tribes. So even though Andrew Jackson's down in Florida trying to remove the Native Americans from Florida, and actually when he becomes president, he goes even further to systematically remove Native Americans from the East Coast, setting a precedent of placing Indians on reservations. You have the government attempting to set aside specific places for tribes that then would be their sovereign territories that they would rule themselves. And at the same time, they would also have ultimate authority over tribal affairs. So it's kind of starting to take away those rights from those Native American tribes. Gibbons versus Ogden strengthens the power of Congress to regulate interstate commerce, and allows the United States to decide who can use and operate steamships and those sorts of things. So there you have it. That is the era of good feelings. Wonder how good it really was. Food for thought. Maybe it was the era of mediocre feelings. You decide.